Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of In Focus on Whitewater Community Television WGTV Channel 11. I'm Chris Hardie, sitting in for Eric Marsh as your host. This is the third episode in a series of conversations that we've been having about what it means for our community to work on and really make progress on the serious and historic challenges of racism and racial discrimination in policing. In particular, we're exploring what it means for white people here to join in and attempt to understand our role in systems of racism and what actions we can take to be a part of the solution. Racism and related concepts like white privilege are not easy topics for white people to explore. It's uncomfortable, it's awkward, it's full of potential for misunderstanding, defensiveness, hurt feelings, or just feeling overwhelmed. But it is clear that if we care about justice, if we care about making sure that everyone in our community can rise together, we have to do this work, and we have to do it urgently. We have to look inside ourselves and be willing to see what's there. We have to have these conversations out loud with each other. And we have to show that we are listening, that we are understanding, and that we are willing to take action. My two guests this hour are coming from very different places in this conversation. A bit later, I'll be talking with Brylynn Quisenberry, a local high school student who recently organized a march around pursuing racial justice. First, I'm talking with the Chief of Police of the Richmond Police Department, Mike Britt. Chief Britt, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.
You became chief just back in April, right in the middle of a pandemic and a lot of other things going on, but you've been a part of the force in the department for some time. Can you just tell us briefly about your history with the Richmond Police Department?
Well, I've been a full-time Richmond officer for going on 25 years. Prior to that, I was a dispatcher and a reserve officer, so I've got about a 35-year history with the department. It was in January of 2016 when Chief Branham was named as the new chief of police by Mayor Snow. He appointed me as a deputy chief, and I've been in the administrative offices since 2016.
Okay, great. We've been talking on this show about sort of the renewed national attention to problems of systemic racism, incidents of police violence, and I wanted to ask what kinds of things the Richmond Police Department has done or has thought about in response to that and in that context.
Well, it's been a very difficult time, and I want to start this topic off by saying that those of you who hate the police based on what you saw in recent news articles of officers in Minneapolis and other places in this world, as a profession, as a representative of this profession, I apologize for that, because I don't think what you or anybody else saw was true modern police work. What you saw are criminal acts, and it's very unfortunate that the acts of a few officers can cause so many problems to a nationwide organization, and that is what we've seen in the news is not what Richmond Police Department or I or most other agencies stand for. It's very unfortunate.
Thank you for that. Are there any specific changes that you as a department have made in training procedures or reporting policies, rules of engagement? I know that it's a conversation, and we've heard about different departments looking at how they handle certain kinds of engagements as a result. Is that something that has come to the Richmond Police Department as well?
Yes, we've began the discussion. We have policies and procedures in place, and one of our long-term goals we haven't been able to really get completed is a complete update of our policies and procedures. So some of them are old, however, they do cover the key, such as use of force. The use of force continuum and the case law that exists regarding use of force. Just the policies need updated just a bit. So I've been spending a lot of time going over our existing policies and our training as well. We've currently Major Bales and I, my deputy chief, been in contact with a company that has offered us an opportunity to rewrite our policy manual and bring it up to today's standards, and as far as legally defensible policies, that type of thing. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. In general, I looked over our entire operation, and if you'll notice, and hopefully the public can too, the Richmond Police Department has not been involved in any unfortunate incidents, thank God. And that's just I have good people. The men and women of the Richmond Police Department are great officers, and there's inherent training now when a police officer comes on new into the profession. They've integrated bias-based policing training, as well as de-escalation techniques, and the mental emotional training.
Okay.
That's all part of the academy now, and it's also a part of our annual recertification training, which we are going through right now. Every officer on this department, and pretty much the state of Indiana, has mandatory training that they have to go through every year. And
okay.
We contracted with a web-based company where the officers are working their way through several hours of video along with pre and post tests, and that covers most of those key areas. So I think we're doing a pretty good job keeping up on that, but we could always do better. And that's what I'm looking at. What more can I do?
Yeah.
And I apologize if we haven't done that so quickly. I think it's important to think this through. I don't like knee-jerk reactions, and we don't currently have any issues that have come to the forefront. So we're thinking forward on this, and we can take the right steps. But
Yeah.
Basically, we've been very fortunate. I've got a great group of officers that are young, and I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but since 2016, we counted the other day, we've hired 36 policemen.
Okay.
Which makes a very young department.
Yeah.
One of the issues that I had that coming in, of course, I'm an old guy, older generation. I think, millennials, yeah, that's going to be a problem, but it really is not. And what I'm learning along the way is that one of the first things that we saw when we started putting younger policemen on the street is the complaints against officers for rudeness and that type of thing is really fallen away. We don't get as many, complaints of that nature. And I'm finding that these newer officers are, I guess the newer generation, are a lot more tolerant of different social status, and I couldn't be prouder of them. They're a lot more accepting of other cultures. And I'm not casting a shadow on my generation, but when you look around at some of the major incidents in the country, you'll notice that a lot of these guys are older officers, or maybe from a different generation of policing.
Yeah. I do want to ask, at a recent demonstration here back in June, there were people sharing some stories of being treated, they felt, poorly in certain circumstances because they felt the color of their skin, being treated poorly by local law enforcement. And it's hard to know, if we weren't there, it's hard to understand exactly what happened. But I do wonder how you track, or if you track or investigate any claims of racial discrimination or bias in local policing. Like, is that a part of some of the systems that you talked about?
Yes, we as long as I can remember, we've always tracked complaints against officers.
Okay.
Additionally, one of the most important things that we do, I don't think it's mandatory in the state of Indiana yet, but we've been doing it for several years. But anytime an officer has to use force of any type with a citizen, such as displaying a weapon or going hands-on with somebody, in addition to the report that the officer writes, the standard criminal report, it's accompanied by a use of force report, which is a completely separate document that breaks down exactly what force was used and why. Okay. So those are compiled by a deputy chief, and we keep a close eye on that. And so far we've done pretty well by looking at those. As far as a complaint against an officer's behavior or whatever, we have a complaint system in place that's been there for years, And you can come to the Richmond Police Department, pick up a complaint form, and fill it out, and then it comes back to the administration, and where it is most likely going to be assigned to someone to investigate.
Okay. And, just thinking about that a little bit, people talk about the power dynamic of an everyday resident like me, walking into the police station and, saying to someone who's carrying a firearm or who has the ability, in theory to put me in jail, to say that, I have a complaint, and that, that could be tough for anyone. And I think there's been some recognition that, racism goes beyond just like an individual act where you can say like, yes, this was clearly racism or it clearly wasn't, but we're talking about, ideas and dynamics that are spread throughout society. And I think, some people say like, oh, a police force couldn't actually be a part of the solution because of the way that they're set up or because of that power dynamic. So how, like as a department, how do you make sure that you're open to listening to those concerns, some of which might be really hard to hear if they're, critiques of the department or of your officers, and finding ways to improve how you serve the community based on that feedback that you get?
Well, we've been getting a lot of feedback. We've had a number of meetings with different groups, and there has been some input on that. And just as I appreciate getting a phone call or an email that my officers did a good job, I also want to know about when a person feels that they did not do a good job. The most difficult thing is to sort out whether that officer's behavior was completely unacceptable or called for the particular incident that they're involved in. Because sometimes, like it or not, the policeman has to become forceful, such as one of the biggest complaints that I get when my policemen are on the scene of something, people walking up that are not involved in that, we shoo them away. You've got to stay away from this particular incident until we get to the bottom of what's going on. And people seem to take offense to that, and I apologize, but that's not something that we will ever do, is allow somebody not involved party to step into one of our encounters in public. Okay.
And, it seems like what I think you're saying, I just want to check on this, in some of the stories we've heard elsewhere, after an incident happened where it seems like there was a racial bias at work in an incident, sometimes it's come out later that, okay, there was a pattern, with an officer who then ended up having an incident that committed violence against a black person or against a person of color. And the question always comes out then, like, why didn't that pattern get looked at earlier? So do you feel like you're in a good place as a department? If a pattern did emerge with an officer's behavior, you feel like you're in a good place to see that, to track it, to investigate it, do something about it? Is that fair?
Yes, that's fair. We are in a good place for that.
Okay.
Nobody gets any special favors because they're a policeman.
Sure.
There's just a code of conduct that I expect from my officers, and it's also spelled out in department policy. And we also have a couple of things in place, such as serious incidents where a law has been broken, presumably by a police officer. We most generally don't investigate that ourselves, is when we'll call our friends at the Indiana State Police as an unbiased, unconnected agency,
okay,
and have them look at it. We've used them this year so far on an incident we had here at the police headquarters. And it's very nice to be in a position where I can call a professional agency such as that and have them do, an open investigation on
okay,
everything. So, but as far as the use of force reports and all that, if we have an officer showing substandard behavior, it jumps out because we don't get complaints every day. Here at the Police Department Administration, we read all complaints against officers, and we don't get them that often. So repeat complaints really stand out. So we're able to be on top of that rather quickly.
Okay. There have been these calls to defund the police is one phrase we've heard a lot. Some people are talking about the version of substantially changing how policing operates. And I think what those calls are asking us to do is to try to confront some of the systems that might lead to discrimination and violence against Black people, especially as they play out in law enforcement situations. And I wonder what those calls mean to you when you hear them, and what do you think those kinds of changes would mean for our area, for policing in our area?
Well, defunding the police, I guess you would expect me to say, and I will tell you that is not a good idea.
Okay.
We have enough trouble staying within our means at our current budget. However, there are things that this department does that a lot of people are not aware of, and it takes up a considerable amount of our resources. And that being, I guess the number one thing would be mental emotional situations that the police are called to. And just some quick reference, since 2014, we've 10% of our calls, approximately 10% of our calls were mental emotional based, and so far up to this year is about 14%. So it continues to grow. The demand for that type of services is definitely on the increase, and I think a lot of these situations could be handled by someone other than the police. I guess better outfitted or trained to handle these. We end up handling these just because we're the default, the fallback. And between the fire department and my officers, we handle a lot of situations that should probably be handled by somebody in the mental health field, professional. But those resources aren't readily available in our community. We have some great resources, but they're just not available in the middle of the night. And so that leaves very few options for us. But the scary part about that as well is some of these incidents involve sometimes violence. And that's a little bit scary as well, having a non-sworn, non-armed person, responding to these things. But that's an area of growth that our department's dealing with. That is, it's very difficult to keep on top of. And when I hear somebody say defund the police, I see other agencies around the nation that are effectively being defunded, but the pattern that I'm seeing is that they are creating non-emergency staff to handle the non-violent situations. Now, not a bad idea. I do believe that change is needed in this profession. Policing has to keep up with modern times as any profession does, and it requires a change of thought process for a lot of officers. But as I said, we're pretty much good at making changes, and that a lot of it has to do with the younger officers. Yeah. But as far as defunding the police, it's not particularly a good idea. But I am fully aware that there are changes to be made, need to be made in this profession. And the mental illness segment I just spoke about is probably one of the larger facets that needs addressed in our profession.
Yeah, I was reading an example of another city, and I'm forgetting which city right now, but they, I don't know if it was a percentage of the police budget, but they took some funding and they set up basically a first responder service for mental health situations. I believe, it was people who were trained in working with mental health, but also then got some training that overlapped a bit with what a police officer might receive for how to de-escalate a situation. And they had a van or something like that was available, 24/7 staffed, and tried to get to situations where there was a mental health issue. Is that the kind of thing that you could imagine being helpful in our community? I know I'm just kind of pulling that out of thin air as an option, and we'd have to figure out where the staffing and where the funding came from. Right. But do you think your department would be able to see that transition happen, be glad for it, and that would help in some kinds of situations where right now, as first responders in a mental health situation, things don't always go the way you would want them to?
That's correct. Yeah, I would be in support of such a program, but as you mentioned already, it's about the resources, the funding for these types of things. But it's gotten to be a large enough problem that it needs more attention from the community as well as the city government. But that is a direction I can see modern policing moving. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's something that's really needed.
Do you have a sense of what percentage of your officers live in Richmond or very close to Richmond, just as a population?
I've never really calculated that,
Yeah.
but it's the majority live in Richmond or close by.
Yeah.
Let's say 2 mile fringe, a lot of them that way. But as far as the exact number that live outside the city, I don't have an answer
Sure.
for that. I'm sorry.
And I guess I ask, some cities have talked about, part of the problem is when you are bringing officers in from, well outside of the neighborhoods that they are then in and policing and serving, that can create a clash. And I wonder, if that's something that could work to our benefit as a smaller city, a smaller community where a lot of officers are part of the communities that they are then serving when on duty, part of the neighborhoods. It seems like there's an opportunity there for, more engagement. And I know, some officers are, very happy to, like, if they're parking, taking the patrol car home and parking in the driveway, they're kind of seen as a part of that neighborhood's community safety program. Are there other opportunities on your mind for better engagement between the police department and the neighborhoods and the city, so that the trust and the sort of understanding of what policing looks like in our community could be improved over time?
Yes, sir. There's several opportunities that we intend to take advantage of. Of course, becoming chief of police in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic and all the other problems that we've had, my plan when things get back to what we call the new normal is the district officers will be attending the neighborhood meetings. And,
okay.
We're moving towards attempting to having the officers work the same districts so they can have familiarity with the public and a lot in that particular area of town. And it's my intention that as long as the officers are available, they're going to be a regular fixture in neighborhood functions and especially the community watch, crime watch meetings, that type of thing. But as you might imagine, it's been a little bit difficult scheduling these types of things and keeping up the full manpower. That's very difficult to do. Just imagine with all the negative press you've seen about law enforcement, how hard it is to recruit new officers right now. And which is an ongoing, they made a news release how we've finally made it to full manpower. This was several months ago. And we did. We're budgeted for 76 more officers and we achieved that, but it lasted for 2 weeks before somebody else retired. So, and now I think right now we're down 4 full-time positions. So recruiting and keeping the street staffed is a factor in how much time an officer would have to go to these meetings. But in a best case scenario, the officer going to have enough manpower it won't really interfere with anything if an officer wants to take an hour or 2 to go to a community meeting. So, but yeah, I definitely see more community engagement from our department. We're just simply in a time right now where it's very difficult to pull that off. One of the other things that we intend on ramping up is social media presence. We've been involved with social media, but quite honestly, in my opinion, I don't think we've done a good enough job with it. So that's another one of the things that, as I mentioned before, when we find out what the new normal is, it's going to be a part of it.
In a time where people are really thinking about the role of police and police departments in communities, I wonder, either for yourself, if you want to speak just for yourself, or for other people who are a part of the department, why do you think most people get into policing? Like, what is the drive? What's the reason that attracts people to it? And what do they hope to get out of it, or what do they hope to do in that role for the most part?
Well, it sounds somewhat corny, but I found that it's actually true. As I mentioned previously, we've hired a lot of young officers. These officers are millennials and maybe a Generation X or 2. But these officers sincerely want to help their community. I mean, it's very, very genuine, deeply based in them. There was a lot of, you certainly don't get into law enforcement work for the money. That's for sure. So the success that we had in recruiting brought us to a new generation that do genuinely want to help, and they'd like to be a part of the solution to some of the problems that our city faces, and that's a very important factor.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned, recruiting is very difficult right now. So
yeah.
I'll throw in a plug as well. Probably tomorrow we're opening up another hiring process for officers to fill these vacancies. We've got 3 applicants in the pipeline to hire right now, and I've got probably 2 or 3 more projected openings coming up. So I definitely love to see people have an interest in helping their community. There's a lot of problems around here, or perceived problems, and my challenge is come and help us fix that. Take an active role. There's no bones, no mistakes. Our police department doesn't reflect our community or our society accurately. We need a lot more minority applicants, and everybody that we hire anymore is basically white, and I'm not sure we've really wrestled with how to increase minority recruitment. But I'm open for ideas if somebody has some good ideas of that. I think we're going to start reaching out and doing some radio ads here very shortly with the inception of this new hiring process.
Yeah. And I'm not at all an expert on hiring for police departments. My sense is that often it's about waiting. The traditional approach has been kind of waiting for the pipeline to be more diverse. And my best understanding is that the kind of outreach you're talking about doing more of, where there's actual connection happening in the community, in neighborhoods, with people of color, and understanding what some of their concerns might be, that would also be an effective way to increase that understanding. Whether or not people end up applying to be a part of the force would remain to be seen. I guess in the little bit of time we have left, again, if I were a person of color and I were feeling like in this community I wasn't always safe, if I were pulled over without explanation, and I felt like it was because of the color of my skin, or if I felt like undue attention was on me in a law enforcement situation, and I wanted to talk to someone about that, or I wanted to try to do something about that out of concern for what's happening nationwide, but also with the local police department. What do you see as my next step? Like, where do I go? Who do I talk to? If it's not just about filing a complaint form, but actually keeping that conversation going, what's my next step?
Your next step should be, you actually have several that you could take. The most common one is calling into the police department and asking to speak with that officer's supervisor. We run 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and the patrol division, each patrol division for first, second, third shift are split into 3 groups. One's led by a sergeant, one's led by a lieutenant, one's led by a shift captain. So a call to the police department to find out a particular officer's supervisor should be relatively simple to do. And you can speak with them. If you don't get the desired results from them, then you always have the administrative officers, myself, Major Bales, or Major Tonich, are available to discuss these situations. But don't be scared of coming into the police department to complain or question an officer's conduct. I mean, that's what we're here for. As I mentioned before, I'm not going to deny maybe some change needs to take place. I can be biased and say that we really don't have those types of problems, but I'm not naive. I know that there are segments, areas of our profession that we can improve on, and implicit bias is one of those.
Okay. Great. Well, Chief Britt, thank you again for your time and your willingness to talk with me about some challenging problems that I know are on people's minds.
You're quite welcome. I appreciate the opportunity. I hope I haven't rambled too much here, but we're very passionate about that. Like I said, it's a very difficult time to police our community, but I think we're doing a good job, and we're going to be better from here. We're going to go upward from where we're at now. Like I said, we just have to find that new normal. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Duke with Wayne County Emergency Management. Spring weather is here. For the most current local updated information, we encourage everyone to sign up for public alerts through Nixle. The easiest way to sign up for Nixle is text 888-777 in the to field of a text message, and then enter your zip code in the body and hit send. For the most current information, whatever the situation may be, we encourage the public to sign up.
Rain barrels. Consider installing a rain barrel to reduce dependency on municipal or potable water. Rain barrels help reduce the flow of storm runoff, reducing erosion, and have the ability to save the average homeowner hundreds of gallons of water per year. Rain barrels are relatively easy to install and maintain. Screens at the gutter inlet at the top of the barrel will need to be kept debris-free, and the spigot or valve at the base should be opened or removed during the winter to prevent the barrel from freezing and cracking. To learn more about rain barrels, visit Hayes Arboretum or online at hayesarb.org.
Well, welcome back, and you're watching Whitewater Community Television, WGTV Channel 11. I'm Chris Hardie, and I'm talking now with Brylynn Quisenberry, who's a student at Richmond High School and who's been doing some hard work, I think, to help our community make progress on issues of racism and police violence. So, Brylynn, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me. Appreciate having you here.
Thank you for having me.
So you organized a march and a demonstration on June 14th that I think brought a lot of attention to problems of systemic racism and police violence against Black people. I think you've said elsewhere that you wanted to do something after the murder of George Floyd and the protests that were happening in response. I wonder if you could share a little bit more about how you decided to create that event and what it was like for you to put it together.
So it kind of happened overnight. So the George Floyd, his death had happened, and then the protests immediately started. So I learned about George Floyd and all the protests in just a day.
Yeah.
So I was on social media and I seen it, and I was just at my boyfriend's house alone, and I texted him. I said, I feel like Richmond might need one of these protests, you know? So I was like, I think I'm just gonna do it. I said, I don't know how good it's gonna be. I don't know how many people are gonna be here, but I'm just gonna wing it. So the first thing I did was make a poster.
Okay.
I sent it to my photographer, Sandra Strain. She did some pretty good pictures. I sent it to her and I was like, hey, can you take some pictures here so it can be on other platforms? And she was like, yeah. And then it just got bigger from there. I had so many water being donated. Like, I have never seen that much water ever. I paid for just about nothing. I really did. The horn that I used to talk, I borrowed. People passed out snacks. I didn't even ask for that.
Wow.
It just all happened.
Yeah.
Like from the community.
Was there a moment when you knew that it had gone from kind of a personal project to something that was really gaining lots of traction and interest? Like, how did you know that it was going to be kind of as big as it was?
So I actually had started a Facebook group.
Okay.
So I had people like, I invited people, and then I had people put if they were going or not going, and there were so many people interested, and I was like, 400 interested doesn't sound like 20 anymore.
Yeah.
So there were even times when I thought I wanted to back out of it because it's so scary, so dangerous, but I'm so glad I did not.
Yeah, I mean, marches and protests are not a typical thing in Richmond, right? And so I can imagine that there were moments where it was challenging to make it happen, maybe where people were questioning you about it. What kinds of bumps did you hit along the way, and what kept you going?
Well, at first I had gotten like a few weeks in, well, like maybe 2, and it didn't seem like there were that many people that were going to show up. And at this point I was like, I really want a lot of people, and I would like cry and be like, really think we need this. I really think people need to see this because there's so much going on. I actually worked at a place, and I quit actually from all of this.
Yeah.
So during all this, it was racist comments all the time and hateful. So I had to leave. Like, I literally lost my job because of this.
Wow. People were coming to your place of work to comment on what you were trying to do, or it just was beyond that?
It was my actual place of work.
Wow.
Like people that I have worked with that had comments.
Oh, I'm really sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. And I kind of put my foot down. Another girl had put her foot down too, and we both quit. And actually, one of the places that passed out water for us, the Cordial Cork, they were super sweet. They passed out water I didn't even know they were. I got an interview there. That's
great. I'm glad there were bits of silver lining in that. I mean, it sounds really hard.
Yeah.
What kinds of stories did you hear from people about what they've experienced when it comes to racism and difficult interactions with the police? And I know there was some storytelling at the event, and I'm imagining you heard others along the way. What kinds of things did you hear about?
My own grandpa has told me about ladies when he was younger, because he's this big, bald black man. Ladies that seem scared about him, like tuck their purses away, or like, the police follow them, make sure that he's not doing anything. The guy at my protest saying that he actually got tackled by police when he had just turned 18 because they said that he was starting trouble, and he's a big dude. I've just heard so much, and not even just in the town, like everywhere. It's everywhere, and it's too much. It's way too much.
Yeah, and some of the refrains during the march were just talking about, I mean, of course, Black Lives Matter, but also enough about police violence and about the way that systems of law enforcement, sometimes without even recognizing it, have racism or racial bias built in. Did you feel like that day unfolded in the way that you wanted it to when the day was actually there? How did it line up with what you were expecting and hoping for?
Like I said, I kind of just winged it. So I wasn't really like planning on what was going to happen. I knew there were going to be people. I knew that I was going to talk. But as soon as I got there and as soon as people started to trail in, I got nervous. I was like, I have to talk in front of these people, and I have to tell them what I feel, because I actually do feel this way. I feel like I need to be heard, and it was really hard. And I had so many people, lovely people there that were calming me down, that helped me talk, that helped me, random people helping me, like just holding signs. I passed out signs, and it all went smoothly. I felt really empowered just doing it.
I was able to be a part of it with my family, and it was really striking to me that there was a really great spirit about the crowd and about sort of the message that was being shared. It was also striking that, the Richmond Police Department was there too, and they were sometimes blocking traffic, accompanying the marchers on the route, sometimes even leading the way with their vehicles. And a few times it seemed like, waving and indicating their support. So how were your interactions with the police department in planning the march and on that day? What did you notice about your interactions there?
So the first officer that I talked to was Officer Benedict, I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
He was really sweet. I even have a picture of him with him. He brought me into the police station by myself, just them. He talked to me about the route. He told me he had some concerns some places, and just to tell people, hey, you need to do this here, or make sure you trail off on the sidewalks and not just other streets. And that was really nice. He said that he'd just stay out of the way and just let me do my thing while he just blocks traffic just so no one would hit us.
Yeah. I spoke with Chief Britt earlier, and we were talking about the problem of racism in police violence, racism in policing that we've been hearing so much about for a long time, but especially in a renewed way recently. And, he felt like the Richmond Police Department is doing well in not having a problem with racist police action like we've seen elsewhere. And when I asked him specifically about how a person of color, if they had a concern and wanted to voice that about racial discrimination in a police department, his recommendation was to call the police department itself to talk about it. And he felt like there would not be retaliation or any reason to be scared of doing that. And I want to ask you, do you think that suggestion works? Like, what do you make of that in the context of the stories you've heard and the work that you've been doing?
So the only reason these protests are happening is because things aren't being taken care of properly. So when he's saying to go ahead and just call and we'll talk about it and blah, 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 I just don't think it's civil anymore. That's why these protests are happening. We are making change happen, like, forcefully. I'm not going to sit down and talk to somebody and be like, hey, I think this is an issue. Oh yeah, I'll get back with you maybe a year or two and see if that works. So I don't think anybody's going to do that at all. Yeah. I think there's a lot of people that are already completely against the police. Doesn't matter where they are, doesn't matter who they are. So they're not going to talk about the problems with them personally or on the phone. I feel like it's much deeper than just to sit down and have a talk.
And, so this is a question that goes well beyond Richmond. But if, as you say, we don't have time anymore for the kind of conversation approach or the internal investigation approach, what do you think it looks like for a city like ours to make real progress and to see real change when it comes to policing, when it comes to addressing racism in our city? Like, do you have a sense of that? And again, I realize it's asking you to solve that in a conversation on TV is a difficult thing, but what kinds of things would you hope for?
I just like it to be seen more. You don't go to the state fair and see Black Lives Matter booth and them handing out things and Black-owned businesses. You don't see that at all. And like I said, we've been trying to even just get an event somewhere, sometime in the year, because I've even spoken to the mayor with a huge group of people, and we've asked to throw some things in the state fair. And he said that we should leave the state fair alone. So if we have to leave the state fair alone, we're going to have to do something else. Make it our own. Make it where people can see it. Educate people. That's all we can do. We can't, because sitting down and talking to people are just you don't have to listen. Yeah. But if it's right there, you can see it no matter what.
Yeah. And it does seem like there's this real tension between Oops, I lost video there. There we are.
Sorry.
That's all right. There's this real tension between, what we're coming to understand is it's a generations long process of people doing work on themselves, of people doing work in their community. And then also the need to see real progress, right? Like, as you say, in many cases, the time for conversation has kind of come and gone. And I think, you and I were talking a little bit before about, there's this real danger of people saying, okay, a march has happened. So, great. We've had that success. We can check that box. And I think for white people, especially if we don't work at it, and even if we do, we're always in danger of limiting our thinking and our awareness of systemic racism just to the times when marches are happening, or police violence is in the news, or when people of color are really asking us to pay attention. And so, clearly we need to be doing that work of anti-racism all the time, every day. We can't fall back to this privileged position of just hoping things will figure themselves out. And I wonder, what you've seen that, if anything, that gives you some hope about the action that's happening in our community around these topics. Where do you think the greatest promise is for progress there, knowing that it's not always going to be this happy-go-lucky tie a bow around it and we're done kind of thing, but where can we make the most progress right now? Do you have a sense of that?
We've actually been talking about it. There's so many areas, the places people live, the schooling, just anything like that. I think for me, since I am in school right now, I'm a sophomore now, I can see it in schools. I can see it when teachers discriminate. There's not many teachers. I do love my teachers, but I've seen teachers that do discriminate, and you just have to keep an eye out. Or you see kids that have been taught at home and their parents bring it there, or they're hateful there. And I just don't think it's a place that should ever have anything like that.
Yeah. I had a good conversation in a previous show with Archer Bunner, a teacher in the local school system. And Archer was talking about just the need for teachers to have some more training, some more awareness about both issues of bias and racism and discrimination, but also thinking about alternative ways of doing conflict resolution, right? Because our culture is so geared toward, especially once you're out in the world, once there's a conflict, call the police and bring the police in. Chief Britt mentioned, how shifting some first responder work to people trained with mental health services could be a way to de-escalate some kinds of conflict, remove the police from the situation. And I really appreciate what you said about just awareness raising as a really key thing that can happen right now. Again, I think there's a real danger of awareness kind of fading into the background. We're coming up on an election season. We're coming up on, the fall. In theory, school might be starting again. Have you talked to people who are doing the hard work every day, and maybe they are white people who have been allies in this situation? Are there resources that you point people to when when they are looking for a way to spend time, an organization to contribute toward a place to volunteer, or is it really about starting in our homes, in our neighborhoods, in the people we spend time with every day? I know it's kind of a rambling question, so I apologize for that.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
I think it starts in our homes and our neighborhoods, where we really have to start, because we teach each other all the time. If you have a phone at your own house and you're looking and on social media, and your social media feed is racist, and you have family that's racist, and then you're going to be like, oh, that's okay. So then it starts at home. So I feel like just even putting a booth somewhere that's hey, I'm over here, maybe you should get some information.
Yeah.
It can help.
Yeah. Do you feel like young people, either students that you know, but just young people generally in our community, are they thinking about, are they talking about the problems of racism and police violence in their community, or is awareness raising needed there as well?
No, for sure. I know that the kids here for sure are. There were kids in the last march. There were kids in my march. I have friends on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat talking about it. Just even sharing a post is something.
Mm-hmm.
Just people that aren't being quiet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's an issue because when you look at the protest, you see Gen Z. That's who you see. You see us. You don't really see a lot of older people getting out there and do that. For my march, I seen a lot of older people, and that was really nice because you don't really see that a lot. Yeah.
If someone was feeling resistant to the idea of doing a march or doing a demonstration, again, that sense that like Richmond isn't a place that's always been friendly to direct action like that.
Mm-hmm.
What did you tell them? Like if they said, I don't really know if that's my thing, doing a march, like how did you help set them at ease about that?
Well, I told a lot of people because a lot of people didn't like the thought of a protest because they're seeing social media and they're seeing how protests are going violent and they're seeing how people are getting tear gassed and shot and people are dying, people are getting really bad hurt. So I had a friend myself that was like, I don't know if I'm actually going to be allowed to when they want to, but they're minors. If a parent says no, they can't go. Yeah. But I've had her help me with posters. She packed some water, just simple things like that. That's helpful. And just the people remember that. The people that are working with it they see that and they remember that. So you don't automatically have to be marching. I know people that are disabled that cannot march. So just doing simple things, donating, posting, just helping out a little bit. It's simple.
I also, I think the paper reported that you've been in some conversations with the local NAACP chapter and talking about what kinds of programs or action might be possible there. Can you say any more about sort of what's happening there and how people might be able to get involved?
So we're still talking about it. We did a huge Zoom. I don't know when we're doing another one. Pastor Chappelle, he's kind of the one that I've been talking to the most. Sure. So we've kind of just picked out points around Richmond where we think that we need to really focus on issues like schools, neighborhoods, workplaces, things like that. How people get their money, just all that other stuff. But other than that, we really haven't talked about much. We've talked about a youth group that we already have. I'm actually the president of that youth group.
Great.
So for this youth group, it's just young people. That's it. Just some high schoolers. That's it. And maybe some adults that just look over us, make sure we're good, and that's it. Because that's what we need. We're not doing the same things every single time. Gen Z hasn't been nice about it. You tell someone something and they're like, well, I'm sorry that you feel that way and all this other stuff. Gen Z is kind of like, I don't care. Here's your facts. You can take it or leave it. And that's kind of what we're doing. We want it to be different than what our elders are doing.
Have you had support and encouragement from grown-ups, elders, adults in your life that have helped make some of this possible? Or do you feel like you've had to do some uphill battles to make things happen? Like what's that been like for you?
My mom actually knows somebody in the Roadrunners. So the Roadrunners actually contacted me personally and they just asked me if I needed protection for my march. My mom and my grandma, every single time I've been busy and not around, they're the ones that collect the water and load the water and drive me and do this and that. So that's really helpful. They've always been there. They get water for me. They get the posters for me. But other than that, everyone's just kind of leaned back and let me do what I need to do, which was really nice. So I don't have someone hovering over me telling me to do this, do that, because I feel like if it's my voice, then somebody will see it more.
Yeah. Yeah. If someone out there, and especially, I mean, a person of color, but even a white person or anyone else, if they're seeing racism, if they're seeing discrimination in action, but they're not sure how to use their voice to do something about it. I mean, you've had this experience now of using your voice, going through what at times sounds like a pretty scary, process and a difficult process. But yeah, what advice would you give to someone who's not sure whether it's worth it to put themselves out there and speak up?
It's 100% worth it. Every voice matters. We say silence is violence because when there's silence, there's nothing that you are doing to help. When you are just quiet, you are not helping. You are just adding to a problem that can for sure be solved if you just open your mouth and say, hey, that's not right. That's it.
And it feels like there's some growing awareness in recent months that there is a distinction between just saying, oh, I'm not racist, and actually doing anti-racist work. And that, as you were saying earlier, like to do nothing, to stand by and sort of let things go as they are, in a lot of ways is perpetuating and being a part of the problem. And that it's, we're long past the point where it's important to do active work. And I think, there are probably people in our community who would look at a march or a demonstration and say that's not making any progress. But I really appreciate, as you said, that just even raising the issue, keeping it in front of people, keeping the conversations going, feels like something we've been bad at and that we can do better and better at every day. How else do you think of yourself as keeping the conversations going and being a part of that now?
I'm on social media a lot.
Yeah.
I'm 15.
Yeah.
So I'm on social media a lot. Every single time I see an article, I sign petitions. I do all that stuff on social media. Super easy stuff that anybody can do. You just scroll through it. You look at it. You see if it's correct. You can Google. Google is real. You can see if the information's correct. Share it.
Yeah.
You can even. I've even been sharing things like Black Lives Still Matter.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Brylynn, I want to thank you for all of the work that you've done, the passion that you've put into this community, even when it's been challenging for your personal life and employment and everything else, and continuing on with that. And I really do hope that as a community, we can honor that work by rising to the challenge that you and others have put out there to really take meaningful action. So thank you. And thanks again for your time today.
Thank you.
This has been another edition of In Focus on Whitewater Community Television. I'm your host, Chris Hardie. Thanks for watching.